Okay, we're going to get that up. That's going to be good. Today I'd like to talk to you about some of the effects of trauma and trauma-informed care that can at times separate us as a community, but if we are aware of the way that trauma impacts our lives and impacts the lives of those we serve, it can actually join us together as a community. And so I'd like you to really think about that and think about how you are actually in a community of people, and very much so here in Ukiah, but in many areas. You're in a community of people who is not only helping, but also healing. Some of us function as healers of that trauma experiences that are lived. Oh, I'm going to try to figure out how to change that thing. Okay. This proves my theory that we have in Indian country that if you stand around and look pitiful, someone will help you. So what I'd like to do is just have you imagine for a moment your role in the services that you provide. You are a part of a community, and I thank Ms. Featherstone for the words that she said, because those are meaningful. They're meaningful words in that we recognize the traumatic experiences that got us here today. In many ways, what we're doing is we're now coming in trying to assist families that are struggling from those traumatic experiences, and that we're a part of that on many sides. And so as we do that, we will be looking at the dynamics of trauma and the dynamics of what I call trauma response. Trauma response very simply is not only the response of those who have had direct traumatic experiences, but also the response of those folks who have had what we might call vicarious responses in being the providers of service to the folks that have had traumatic experiences, but also the issues of intergenerational trauma. And as members of the Native community, we are in some ways experts in this because we have had multiple severe traumatic experiences with every generation for over 100 years. And the compounded impact of those many times takes a toll upon our community, but most importantly, it takes a toll upon our families. Our families, as many of you know, are the carriers of that traumatic history. So that trauma history gets passed down unconsciously from generation to generation. And if we are not able to address it, if we're not able to recognize it, then what can we do? Well, we can only complain about it, right? And God, we're good at that. So imagine, if you will, and by the way, I wanted to let you folks in on something. This is a strange room, by the way. These people over here, they've been talking about you people. I don't know, man. I don't know what you did, but it's not working out, okay? These people over here, don't worry about them because they're really needy people, okay? And so you can always feel superior because they have needs, they have issues. But these people over here actually have a legitimate issue that they feel like they're looked down upon by you people over here. And so what does that tell me? Well, it tells me I want to be over here, right? Yeah, I like it. Okay, this is good. So what happens, that's kind of very simply put the dynamic that happens in trauma response. We have folks that are reeling from generations of traumatic experiences, and then folks that see themselves as helpers, but also see themselves as people that don't live those experiences necessarily, or somehow distanced from that. And so it sets up a dynamic of, first of all, privilege, right? But secondly, it sets up a dynamic of what's wrong with those people, right? And then there's an additional dynamic that happens in that, darn it, you know what happens? You're seen in the community that you live in as the person that works with those people. Darn it. Now we're in this together. How's that going to work? Well, it's very insidious, and now we can play that dance all day, right? All day, every day, we can just keep doing that. And by the way, it's been done. What we find is that there's no future in that. That what it does is it sets up a dynamic where those that need to be served will always need to be served. It's like a dynamic of keeping people down. And so what we find is that the way that we address these issues would be to say, let's join together. Let's join as a community in a helping role, in a healing role, and in a recovery role to bring healing to our community. And then we're at least on the same team. So this is something very important that you'll hear talked about over and over. So childhood trauma is something that's very common, unfortunately. And I've spent my career, for the most part, directly treating childhood trauma. It's been my area of expertise, my area of study. I'm many times called upon by courts, either as an investigator or an expert witness. And I've also served as an advisory capacity during the Clinton administration to how issues of childhood trauma might be addressed. And it's important to understand that trauma is insidious in the sense that it preys on our most vulnerable population. So the most vulnerable populations that you have in your community, that's where trauma is going to find itself. Now, interestingly enough, that's not always the case, but it's going to exploit those who can be exploited. Okay? So as we begin to look at that dynamics of trauma and trauma response, we begin to see that those behaviors, those residual behaviors of traumatic experiences then begin to live themselves out in our own experiences and the experiences of our families. So what do we think? Well, we think, children who are disadvantaged, children who are homeless, children who have mental illness, families where there's addiction, particularly at risk are children with developmental disabilities of any kind. And so trauma finds its way, doesn't it? Now, we can sit around all day and say, we're the helpers over here, and we don't know what's wrong over here, but things keep happening. We could sit there and do that all day and not get us anywhere. What we can do is we can say something. We can do something that actually comes from my own traditions. In my own tradition, what we do, if someone is, we didn't have a lot of traumatic experiences like that in our Chumash way. By the way, I'm just from down the coast here, coastal neighbor. In our way, what we did is that if someone was, let's say a child was being abused, or a child was being neglected, or maybe a family was just just going through some very, very hard times. What would we do? What was our cultural response to that? Well, as a family that was considered an honored family or an honorable family, maybe, leadership family, what we would do is that it would be called upon for one of us to then take a look at those children who maybe weren't being cared for very well, and we adopt them into our home. Now remember, we have a very different way of looking at things than Europeans. They're not cattle, they're not property, they're children. So different approach. Because when we then adopt a child into our family, that child literally becomes a part of our family. That doesn't sever any relationship they had with their other family. As a matter of fact, that makes us related now to those other folks, that other family. So we have relationships. And so what's the other side of that? Well, the other side of that is as a, let's say, status family, whatever that might mean, a higher status family, then we can't have our relatives living like that, can we? So therefore, we've got to help them out. We've got to make sure that and we'll sit down and we'll talk with them, and we said, we'll say, in our ceremony where we adopted your son or your daughter, that's not to interfere with anything that's going on between you and your son and daughter. But as we accept that together, now we have to talk to you about what kind of family we are. So we have that discussion, like, we're not sure if you knew what you were signing on for here, but let's talk about the ABCs of our family, okay? And so we begin to talk about how we are to be as a people, how we're meant to be as a people. And we've done some really great work down in San Diego that has really nothing to do with anything I did. I was more of a bystander. We have a program down there that I'll divert off a little bit and talk about. It's called the My Two Aunties program. And it comes from our cultural ways in Southern California. I think it rings true for many cultures, by the way, but we identify it and know it because it's very formal in our culture. And what happens in the My Two Aunties program is that in our families, the aunties are the teachers of those lessons, right? The aunties come over, whether they're directly related to you or not. They will come by the house and they will visit and they will have, coffee, tea, whatever it might be. And they'll tell you the lessons of the family, how you are, how we're meant to be, how we're meant to raise children, how we're meant to be together. Now, looking around the room, I can see a few aunties around here. You know who I'm talking about. But those, and what happens in our way is that when your auntie comes along, it's time for learning. The kids sit down, family sits down, we all talk, right? Sounds very nice, doesn't it? What happens when two aunties show up? Does anyone know? Something has gone awry. Somebody has crossed the line someplace, and we're about to sit down and have a talk with you. And so that's what happens in our way. It's like, there's something not working here, so we're here to tell you about it and work it out with you and find out how to correct this. And the discussion always ends with, and you will correct this. So in the My Two Aunties program, we actually formalized this into like a curriculum. What would the aunties say? What would they do? How would that happen? And with the support of the Children's Bureau, who, if you don't know who that is, the Children's Bureau funds all foster care within the United States. So with the help of the Children's Bureau, we were able to put together and evaluate the actual curriculum and process of that. And what we're finding is that our cultural ways, it almost makes too much sense, doesn't it? Our cultural ways are very, very effective. Why? Because we're building upon the strength of the family rather than taking away from the family, rather than saying, well, that's really interesting that you have all these ways, but just kind of put that over here and let me teach you about this. And those processes may seem very foreign to them. Those processes might actually seem to create a different message than what you're intending. So in those processes, what happens is that you're in many ways telling a family that we're working with that the strengths that you have, they're no good. So we're here to give you some other strengths. But the only thing we know about those is because you were raised with the first set of strengths, you're probably not going to use the second set, right? It goes too much against the grain. So why not develop strength in families based upon the inherent strength that they have? So the reason I go through all that is to explain that when we as helping agencies come in and we have a formula or an algorithm or whatever you might want to call it for how to make a family better, stronger, healthier, then what happens is that without engaging that family and finding the strengths of that family, we have learned to exploit the vulnerabilities that that family has. Simply by saying, you have to set all that aside and do this. And that may work for a while, and it may, make some dramatic changes actually, but it's in the long run, we're really kind of fighting against the cultural ways of that family. So what we want to do is we want to find the strengths of that family. That whole dynamic is set up by the trauma response that we have. So remember I said we were a community? Well, the trauma response that we have is very important. By the way, I keep doing this because I hurt my back last week. Shouldn't have been standing for 12 hours. The trauma response that we have sets up a dynamic of, and it's a self-protective dynamic, by the way, that those people, remember those people? Yeah. Those people are problematic, right? And we are their solution to healing. Wow, a little bit arrogant. If I was a client, I don't know if I'd want to sign on for that. But in addition to that, what happens? Well, it sets this agenda that we have actually a vested interest, don't we? In them being problematic and us being the purveyors of whatever healing is. So let's go to the next slide. I've jumped around a little here, by the way. So what we find is that it then serves to set up this dynamic of how trauma affects families that are seeking potential helping relationships. So not surprisingly, individuals with histories of abuse are often reluctant to engage, or they quickly drop out of any number of human services. And the reason that happens is that you are a risk to them, right? Why are you a risk to them? Because everyone's a risk to them, right? When Think of trauma response as the most basic trauma response is anxiety, right? What is anxiety? It's a lack of feeling safe. So anyone you come in contact with, you don't feel safe with. And here we come along with what I say, we have a healthy self-esteem and a yellow clipboard. And we're the experts from out of town. And we come in and we say, well, let's find out what's wrong with you. Let's make a list, right? So for them, that's what you hear. It's like, let's look at the work in front of us and let's look at what we might have to do, right? For the people that need the help, what they hear is, you're wrong. Let us count the ways together. Well, let's see. First you were born. You were born wrong, by the way. And then it started going downhill from there. So that doesn't give much hope, does it? So what we do is we begin to realize, we have to realize our role, how we change ourselves, how we are in ourselves has a lot to do with that dynamic. So clients are, with responses, trauma responses, are going to be very vigilant at times. They're going to be very suspicious at times. And you may see any number of behaviors that will come out of that. But what you will find is something more common than, you may see more commonly than you think. One is that we would think that someone who's had traumatic experiences or even had intergenerational trauma, that those people, remember those people, okay, those people, they might be what? What would you expect if someone had traumatic experiences in their lives? Well, if we think about it, we might say, well, I guess they'd be sad. I guess they might be depressed. I guess they might be shy away from you, things like that. Well, that might be the case in some situations, but more likely, they're going to be oppositional. They're going to be pushing you away because you're a threat to them, right? The best offense is a good defense. The other way around. Best defense is a good offense. So what we have to understand is that they don't know to trust us. And so trust is a very important first step. And don't think of it as something that is achieved once and then you're past it. You have to earn it every time. And it's communicated differently. I've known folks, for instance, that came in and said, I really work hard to establish therapists I work with, establish a trusting relationship with my native clients and other families that have trauma. And, I talk to them and we sit down and I just kind of get us to center and relax, focus. They're very threatened by that. Why? Well, you're trying to get them to lay down their armor, right? Well, my armor is all what's keeping me together today, right? So if you want me to lay down my armor, you better do something better than sit quietly. So what does that mean? It means you have to begin to have an understanding of who I am. You have to have an understanding of my story. I don't want you to cry with me. I really want you to accept me. And to accept that if that's my story and you can accept my story in a non-judgmental way, then maybe we could actually work on some solutions together. So, it's difficult for survivors to feel safety and trust. So to feel safe is the first step. To feel trust is a whole nother step. And that is that I don't know that I can trust you for many, 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 many reasons. So you're going to have to prove yourself to me. And that's when we begin to say, as helpers, we go, excuse me, wait a minute. You realize that I'm the helper, right? I'm the person they sent you to, right? The court sent you here. I'm the good guy. And you, by the way, are someone who needs to work on your issues of trust. And well, that's just kind of blowing the relationship out the window. What it's more, it may be more helpful to say, I know that we have to have trust between us, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to earn that trust, not by telling you to trust me, because that's another red light for most folks. Because remember, everyone that ever abused me told me to trust me, right? Trust them. So what you would want to do, the way to engage that, would be to say, I know that we need to develop trust, and we're going to earn that trust together. So it's not that I'm going to earn your trust. It's that we're going to learn to trust each other. And so here's a real basic way to do that. I'm going to do the things that I say that I'm going to do. And I'm going to ask you to do the same. And as we do that together, then we build trust.